excited to be recording in my own room finally. Oh, I know I showed it off during my Person Behind the Pen episode last week. Oh, but I am looking forward to more reviews now that you can actually see it and spend more than just a minute or two in the room with me, okay? Thank you so much in advance and for all of your comments so far. Thank you! I also want to mention, before I forget, that while it's very sad that When Words Collide won't be having an in-person aspect this year, that I will still be attending, and not just as an attendee. Yep, that's right. I will be presenting this year again. And not just one or two, 4 different presentations, including my first ever solo presentation. So, if you're interested in writing, WWC is free this year, and you can sign up by going over to their website. As always, it will still be happening from August 13th to the 15th. I will put a link in the description below, so you can go over and find it if you haven't yet. And when we get a little bit closer to the date, I'll talk about which ones I'll be doing. Though I think the schedules will be going up soon too, so you'll be able to check that way as well. Alright? As always, please like, share, and subscribe if you like what I do here. I know I mention it every episode, but one of the best ways to get my channel to grow is by word of mouth out there by you guys. I really appreciate it every time you do. Now, in last week's episode, Richard had finally been released from Deckard's tender ministrations. While he was inordinately pleased to be on his own finally, it was clear to everyone, including him, that while he may have been released, he wasn't up for more than what he'd essentially been doing at Deckard's house. Sleeping and healing. However, he felt he wasn't really able to plan under the healer's watchful gaze, and while he may have been cleared of the crime of murder, since the men had seemed to attack him unprovoked, he is still clearly running from something, and requires a plan to escape as soon as possible. And now, on with the show. Okay, now let me just pull up the book here. And there we go. That'll be just about perfect. Okay? Now, Kazunoha took a sip of the wine that Janice handed her and let out a happy sigh. Janice attempted a smile. It isn't like you don't get this at home. Kazunoha looked at her, and the woman flinched. Don't do that, Kazunoha said. Most people didn't like her, and acted as though anything but a prim smile meant that she was secretly planning on stealing their firstborn. She wasn't as graceful or as eloquent as Himiko, but that didn't mean that she was a monster. She snorted. Not that Himiko was eloquent when she dealt with her. Janice stammered out an apology and fled. Kazunoha ground her teeth and took another sip of the wine. Cool and refreshing, the wine left the barest hint of an aftertaste. She didn't actually get this at home, not now that Himiko could lord it over her as another difference between them. It hadn't been so bad before Himiko was technically her matriarch. But now their servants followed her orders to the letter. Turning her mind from the wine, she looked around, hoping to see Richard. Many of the tables had occupants, but most were ignoring her, aside from a few men giving her appreciative smiles. She ignored the looks. According to rumor, Deckard was planning on bringing Richard back to the Koi after dinner to finish healing. She'd found out little else, though, and she was quickly running out of places to look. He'd arrived off the sea, washed his clothes and body at the bathhouse, flirted with the girls, and taken a bed here. Nobody had been willing to tell her where he'd come from, or why. The only thing the sheriff had been willing to tell her was that there hadn't been any warrants out for his arrest, and that had been said in a way that suggested that the man wasn't done looking yet. Kala remembered him too, but vaguely. She remembered the weapons and the terror more than anything else. Himiko entered the bar, and Kazunoha let out an annoyed breath. "What are you doing here?" Himiko approached her table and looked disapprovingly at the wine in her hand. As one, the bar patron seemed to suck in a breath and go quiet. Kazunoha made a point of swishing the light fluid in her glass and sipped it again. Kazunoha hadn't thought that Himiko's frown could deepen. That it did felt a bit like a personal victory. I finished my meeting with Sheriff Dobson and decided I didn't want to go home yet. Himiko waved at Asashi as she came in and then turned back to Kazunoha. Don't get in any more trouble, Kazunoha. I mean it. The last thing our name needs is yet another disgrace. Disgrace? I saved a man's life, Kazunoha said. A few people's heads turned to look at them, and she lowered her voice. What did you expect me to do when I saw him being attacked? Stay out of it, like any other sensible person would have. Or run away to get help. I must say, I'm glad she didn't hesitate, a voice said from behind Kazunoha. Kazunoha turned and saw Richard. Kazunoha liked him even more now. Her sister's eyes promised dire consequences for him, if she could ever make them stick. You're looking better, Himiko said. Though Kazunoha disagreed with her sister on nearly everything, it pleased her to agree this time. She had thought Richard decent-looking when she'd first seen him. After the fight, regardless of his compliments, she hadn't even considered his half-conscious attempts to flirt. He'd needed her help, and that was all that mattered. Now, she looked. His skin wasn't quite as dark as she'd originally thought. It was a soft shade of almond, not cinnamon. His eyes were warm as well, a bare smidge or two lighter than black. His hair was a dark brown, cut strangely short, spiking out from his head. His clothes were strange in their color, if not their design. Pants, shirt, vest, cloak, it was all black. All of his metal was dark, like silver after it had developed a patina. She thought it might have been some type of iron. It seemed almost incongruous. Black wasn't a cheap color, though. With an outfit this expensive, she would have expected him to have silver, brass, or gold, not some common metal. He was smiling at her. Kizunaha, that is how you pronounce it, yes? Her heart fluttered when he said her name, and she almost shivered as it rolled off his lips. His pronunciation was horrible, of course, but she found that in his accent she didn't mind as much. It flowed like a song. The softness behind it felt genuine. Yes, it is. Please, sit down. Good. I had worried that I had somehow gotten your name wrong. I wasn't in the best frame of mind when you tried to teach me. Richard set his drink down and took the seat across the table from her. I'm impressed that you retained it at all. It isn't an easy one to learn, she said. Himiko wagged the finger at Kazunoha. My sister is a bold-faced liar if she lets you use that pronunciation. We'll finish this conversation later. Himiko stalked off to the table Asashi had chosen. The hunter positively shone as her sister drew near. Richard seemed not to notice her sister leaving. I'm pronouncing it wrong? Ignore my sister. You are not pronouncing it the traditional way, but I like the way you say it. He smiled again. It is a beautiful name. I've never heard its like. Still, I would hate to get your name wrong. Perhaps I should call you by what your healer called you. What was it again? Kuzu? Kazunoha didn't have a meaning in the Sian language. It had been the name of a peasant woman, centuries ago, who had given her noble husband a son, but had abandoned her duty to him when he'd become violent. Her father had given it to her as a reminder that she would never be as good as Himiko, who'd been named after an empress. Kuzu, on the other hand, did have a direct translation. Trash. The only person she allowed to use it was Deckard. He hadn't known the insult for what it was. The only language he spoke was Kantuk, though she knew he understood his people's native language as well. It had helped that it had irritated her father for her to grant him the privilege. "No, please, call me Kazunaha. I've never liked that nickname." Richard shrugged. "Of course. Forgive my pronunciation until I've had a chance to study it. The Sian language isn't much like my own, and it doesn't roll off the tongue easily. Unlike my sister, I don't mind waiting for you to learn. Where are you from?" "Originally," he said, "Kaleka State." It took her a moment to place it. Kaleka was a small island nation on the other side of the map. It would take half a year to sail there from Hidan. Her father had always said that if you could get a foothold in Giza, their capital, you would hardly even need to work. With all the trade going in and out, there would always be somewhere to send your wares. Always someone with the money to pay for them. "Why did you come all the way here?" she asked. "Meeting you isn't reason enough?" he asked. With a sigh, though, he continued, "I had wanderlust. I wanted to see the world, make my mark in it." Just like her. She reached a hand across the table and patted his. He took hers in his own. "I hadn't gotten a chance to thank you. You kept your head in a very difficult situation." She thought of Deckard yelling at her, at how stupid she'd been. She pulled her hand back. "You mean you were lucky our healer was awake? That he was at home at all?" She looked away. "You could have died when I pulled that bolt out, without making sure." Richard switched chairs, moving to the one beside her. "I meant what I said. I'm lucky that your friend was close and knew what to do, but without your help, I don't know that I would have survived at all." Kazunaha didn't meet his eye. "Speaking of which, should you be up and about already?" "The bolt hadn't gone in as deep as we thought," he said. "Your friend said that my collapse was caused by having too much alcohol in my system, and losing too much blood. He told me to take care of myself for a few days, but that I'll be fine to do the rest of my convalescence here." She bobbed her head in relief. Deckard would know if anybody would. Richard nodded. "This wasn't all I want to talk about, though. I was wondering what you do around here. For work, I mean." Kazunaha looked away. "I don't really have a job. Being an illegitimate noble doesn't leave you with a lot of options." At her age, she shouldn't be jobless sitting at home all day. Everyone her age was either married or working. She had no prospects in either of those. And while she liked her freedom, she liked to have someone around her that understood. "Good," he said. "I need the aid of a brave local." "A brave local? Why?" He leaned in close. "I found an old book about the last voyage of a sailing boat that went missing nearly a century ago in these parts. That's why I came up here originally." Kazunaha blinked. "You found a treasure map?" "Less a map, and more an account of her travels. She was running late, carrying the servant of a prominent merchant from Helvetica. Helvetica was only a month or so away on a fast boat. Still, ships weren't lost near the coast often. Staying inside the reef was usually fine, but ships that went outside were never seen again." "Why would you think she was lost around here?" "Well, according to the book, her crew died trying to bring her to shore near Barris Cove." Barris Cove wasn't far from Hidan, but she shook her head. If everyone died bringing it in, then who got the book out? And if they knew where it was, why would they just leave it? Richard smiled. "One man escaped the wreckage, and he was insane by the time anyone found him after that storm took down his boat. Bonkers for months. They took him back to his family when the winter was over. It took years before he was able to say where the ship was, and by then he was too old for the travel. One of his kids wrote down everything he said about the incident, hoping to come out here and find it. Fortunately, he never made it. What about his trail? Surely a hunter could have followed it. Hunters were best at that sort of stuff. According to the book, nobody could have. Not even a hunter. He was out there for weeks before they found him. And you expect us to be able to find it? With the book telling us where to go, and you helping me tell what the landmarks he mentions are? Yes. Just imagine coming home, baskets of coin, treasures found, secrets unearthed and laid bare. Kazunaha bit her lip. The problem was she could see it all too well. A crashed ship, long hidden, monsters braved, and a chest full of coins and gems at the end. What kid hadn't played treasure hunter growing up? They were fantasies that her father hadn't appreciated. Under his tutelage, they'd become fog, burning away under a ruthless sun. Money was better made through trade, deals, business partners, and less dangerous endeavors. Risky ones, yes. Dangerous ones, no. And still, it called her. What proof do you have that it's even still there? She asked, covering up her indecision. He raised his eyebrows in a challenging manner. Are you saying you're in? She could understand his reluctance. If he gave away too much, she could try to find it before he could. There were legends, myths of treasure, ships lost and found, monsters killing everyone but leaving the holds untouched. She sighed, wishing that Grandma Zola hadn't passed away last year. The old woman hadn't been related, but she had watched over every kid in Hidan at some point. She'd been a font of knowledge about the old stories. Unfortunately, Kazuna's father had considered it unseemly that a peasant should teach any of his children, so she'd only gotten to listen to a fraction of her stories, usually when Himiko's mother was too sick to take care of them herself. Zola would have remembered that this ship existed. I'm not agreeing yet, but even I need more information than just a child's tale. What would my part be in this scheme of yours? A guide, he said, leaning back. I don't know the area, the landmarks, or the dangers. Without a guide, I'm worried it will take months or longer to locate. With your help, we might be able to cut it down 2 weeks. She bit her lip, and he grinned. Come on, you aren't one of those who hides away in town all day, every day, right? Some, like Himiko, preferred staying inside. The city walls were enough to protect them from most troubles. So many small towns fell to monsters during their first few years, even now. Unlike them, Hidan had survived, grown, and even flourished. Staying inside was how you stayed safe. Safe wasn't enough for Kazunaha. The green grasses outside of the wall called to her, enough that she'd found ways to get over the wall to play in those fields without anyone knowing. True, she hadn't generally gone further than the sandy flats, the dark beach that ventured inland further than any of the others. On the far side of it, there was some farmland, and just beyond that, the tannery. It was past that where the real danger began. I think most do, but yes, I think I've gone further than most. If we don't count the hunters, of course. Richard grinned at her. I knew I'd pegged you right. Hardly, Deckard said as he walked up. He towered over the table, the queue he'd pulled his blonde hair into making him look more severe than usual. Fortunately, his plain white-gray clothes served to make him a little less intimidating. I told you she had no survival instincts when you asked. Well, she has survival instincts. What she doesn't have is an instinctive terror of being without walls, Richard said. Same thing, Deckard said. What are you doing here, Deckard? Kazunaha asked. Deckard pointed at Richard's cup instead of answering her question. I thought I told you no alcohol for a week." The woman dropped it off before I even asked. It would be rude not to finish it. Richard smirked and took a sip. Deckard stared at him. Richard put the cup further away and gestured for one of the barmaids. "Fine, I'll get water for the rest of the night. But this isn't getting me an answer. Kazunaha, will you be my guide?" It sounded simple enough, but she had a bad feeling about it. "I don't know, Richard. It still sounds sketchy." Deckard raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said you just needed a guide." Without waiting for a response, he turned and raised his voice, calling for Himiko. Kazunaha could see Himiko apologize to Hisashi before she came back to their table. "Deckard, what do you need?" Richard looked concerned, but Kazunaha just shook her head. "Richard is offering me a job. Nothing that you need to concern yourself with, Himiko." Himiko laughed. "Make sure you don't pay her until it's done. She's never been able to hold down any task she's been given." Kazunaha didn't even wait for Richard's response. "How would you know? I've never had the option before." Himiko ignored her. "So, what is this job opportunity?" "He needs a guide," Deckard said. His gaze hadn't left Richard's yet. "That hardly seems necessary." Himiko frowned. "Kindler's Cove isn't that big." Kindler's Cove was just down the hill from the local lighthouse, and the one place that everyone in the city could get to without worrying about their safety. There was a pilgrimage to a nearby cave for those that followed Kitten, a goddess of divination from Deckard's pantheon. She was the most popular goddess in the area, and her church, a 3-story monster of stone with high arcing walls, was the biggest building in town. Kazunaha thought a tiny prayer for her. She didn't follow the goddess, being brought up in the religion of her ancestors, but it couldn't hurt. "I need a guide to take me a bit further than Kindler's Cove," Richard said smoothly. Himiko frowned and tossed her hair. "How far?" "It doesn't matter," Kazunaha said. "Of course it..." Deckard raised a hand, stopping Himiko. "And why wouldn't you ask a hunter? Isashi's here tonight." "Because I don't know any of the hunters, and I would like to get to know the woman who saved my life better." Kazunaha blinked. She'd never had someone so clearly put their interest into words before. Himiko glared at Kazunaha. "Absolutely not, Kazunaha!" Something in Kazunaha snapped. "Why do you think you can give me orders?" "I'm head of the household," Himiko said. "What does that have to do with it?" "You haven't reached your majority." "Well, it's less than a month away." Himiko growled. I don't know why our father put up with you." "This has nothing to do with me being the head of household, and everything to do with you being an idiot. You weren't going, that's final." "If it had nothing to do with you wanting to control me, you wouldn't have brought up your status." Kazunaha spun on Richard. "I accept. Come to my house tomorrow morning. We'll make arrangements then." "I forbid it!" Himiko interjected. Richard put up his hands. "I won't be able to make it tomorrow." He winced. "I'm still not well yet. I will let you know when I am better." Deckard muttered under his breath. "At least someone at this table has some sense." "When you're well, then," Kazunaha said imperiously. Richard smiled. "I'm sure I can find my way there." Kazunaha nodded and stomped out of the bar. And we're done. Just let me put this book down. It will be good there until we come back next week. Now, this is the first chapter I think of when I think of my novel. Perhaps because it was one of the few that I could almost very clearly see in my mind from the very moment I started playing around with these characters to see where I could take them. I don't know if it's my favorite chapter of the book, mainly because even if it's my book, I still love it. Oh, one of the most persuasive bits of writing advice that I've ever heard is, write the book you want to read. And all I can say is that, yes, I did. But I think that's going to be it for this week. Don't forget to put any of your questions and any observations you have in the comments below. Or, remember, you can send them to me directly, if you'd like to say them anonymously. And until then, have a great week! Bye!